Thank you. I'm learning. Okay, so I'm going to just give you a little overview of the self-assessment that we conducted. So the self-assessment has the same structure for all the CESUs that are renewing. We have 3 sections. We have to go through the federal responsibilities, host universities responsibilities, and then participation of all partners. And there are a number of questions we have to answer, and the whole package is online if anyone would like to see what it looks like. So what we did was we kind of updated our projects database to figure out it was actually a lot of work to survey all the federal partners and contacting you guys to get a full database of all the awards that we had been running through the CSU over the last 5 years. We did a review of our activities and accomplishments, and then we sent out surveys to all of you. So thanks to everyone who responded to those surveys. In summary, right now we have in our CESU, we have the Narragansett Indian tribe. We have 38 academic institutions and nonprofit research organizations and 9 federal agencies. And over the last 5 years, we had 168 awards that ran through the CSU at a total value of almost $28 million. So I don't know, Tom could say more about this, but I think in comparison to some of the other CSUs, we're probably in the mid-range. There are some that have more awards than us, or they have higher awards because they have some big awards from the Department of Defense or the Bureau of Land Management out west. But anyway, I think we're doing really well. It was great to see that actually 8 out of 9 federal agencies provided awards. And of course, NPS is the biggest one. They provided 102 out of those 168 awards. But we did get a few from the others as well, USGS, Department of Defense. And 22 out of 38 of you guys, of the non-federal partners, received awards. So I feel like that's probably an area where we could try to do better. Of course, we don't know how many partners applied for grants and didn't get them. That we don't have. We just have the awardees. So URI, the host, did get the most awards, but there are several of you like SUNY, UMaine, others that are also getting, above 15 awards per year. So it's nice to see that it was pretty productive. So for the federal responsibilities, URI received almost $72,000 from the federal partners to host the CSU. So it's about $15,000 a year that covers everything from our coordinator time to putting things on the web, a little bit of my time. But 15,000 a year, of course, is nowhere near enough to manage the CSU. So URI basically leveraged over $250,000 over the same time period to manage the CSU. We do have Brian here. We're very happy to have him. He's our NPS research coordinator, and I don't think we could run the CSU as smoothly without him. He works with us on a daily basis, helping us with our website database. He's always sending me funding opportunities, and he's helping whenever there's a partner interested in joining. He helps plan meetings. He's coordinating, and he's also participating in academics at URI. I think we have 5 or 6 National Park Service staff that are duty stationed at URI right now. So it's nice to have that NPS community here. As you've seen, we do have some federal partners, especially NPS, that have been more active than others. But in general, when we did the survey of the federal partners, they all were pretty satisfied with the project implementation. They really like the CSU because they feel like the projects are designed as partnerships, and that they're long-term and interdisciplinary. So it's a chance for the federal agencies to really partner up with the non-federal partners and work over a long term. Some of the challenges, of course, we had COVID-19, which was hard during this time period. And sometimes we saw, or the federal partners noted, there were some communication breakdowns between the federal agencies and the recipients. And that may in part be because of COVID-19, but I also think there's been some personnel changes. We had a hard time at times keeping up with our database and making sure we had the right people on our contacts. For the host university responsibilities, so we sort of host the CSU and the research coordinator, but URI, as you've seen, also received several NAC CSU awards that engaged at least 15 faculty members. So I took over the CSU about a year ago, and my predecessor, Judith Swift, we're both really active in the national CSU community. We have a national meeting once a year that we go to, but then we participate in the national level directors meeting. And I think that's really useful because there we talk to the other CESU directors, and we, some of the issues that we have, like low funding and so on, these are not unique to us. The IDC rate is very low. Everyone's concerned about that. So we have a chance working through that group to try to advocate for ourselves as sort of the whole CSU. Main funding is limited. I think if we had more funds to manage the CSU, I think we could do a lot better. We could do more things. But I think thinking about the next 5 years, I do have some ideas of things we could do to perhaps make the network a little more dynamic and sort of, to maybe develop some more opportunities. So for the participation of all partners, I feel like the partners are really responsive when we communicate. We really appreciate everyone responding to surveys and so forth. We did add 14 new partners in this phase. Most of those were added in 2019 when we entered the new phase. So in the survey that we did with the non-federal partners, everyone that responded said they were satisfied with the URI communications. There was a question specifically about students, and that seems to be the norm in all CSU's projects to engage students. The non-federal partners also said that and the CSU is good because it allows us to build and strengthen our relationships with funding agencies. The overhead of 17.5% has some real benefits because the money goes further, and it can also help us provide with our match requirements, but it is definitely an issue, is seen at the level of the offices of sponsored projects, because all universities are hurting financially right now, and when projects come in at that IDC, it's a little tough. So there is some discussion within the bigger CSU Directors Council to try to get that IDC rate to go up. So it's a very slow process, but just know that we are working on it.
Is this a time to ask questions, or should we wait later?
You can ask now, that's fine.
Well, related to this indirect cost rate, certainly it's great. It really facilitates that. But typically, if as a member of the CSU, does the university have the right to say we submit a proposal, we apply to an RFP and we get it? Does the university typically have to honor that 17.5%, or can they choose, no, we're not going to do it?
Well, they don't have I mean, they can't refuse the IDC, but I would say at URI, we have to, any proposal that's submitted by a PI at URI has to go through an approval process before the proposal is submitted. So that decision from the OSP should come before you submit the proposal, because if they've approved the proposal going to the funding agency, then they can't turn around and not accept the IDC rate when the proposal is awarded.
Right. And when we see these RFPs that you send to us all the time, which is really great, are those people outside of the CESU can also be applying for those as well? Is that how it works? They're not exclusive to CESU institutions?
Most of the ones I send to you are exclusive to CSUs, unless there are some of the federal agencies, like NOAA, for example. Sometimes they will put out a request for proposals where they will say in there that if your institution is part of a CSU, you can use that mechanism if it fits within that CSU. So yeah, you'd have to read the fine print, but usually I try to put that in my email. If I'll just say this is open to CSUs, or I'll say this is open to anyone, but you can use the CSU IDC.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so for the recommendations, we said, could we find some ways to increase participation of non-federal partners or increase opportunities to interact with federal and non-federal partners? One idea that I have maybe going forward would be to have some sort of quarterly, maybe coffee hour, where we each quarter would pick one of the federal partners and maybe pick a topic. Say, for example, if we had Bessie joining us, we could have a coffee hour focusing on the environmental impacts of offshore wind or something, and then invite partners, whoever's interested in that topic, to join the coffee hour, to kind of present what you're doing in that area, to discuss what the federal agency is interested in. So we haven't started that yet, but that's an idea that I have. I see Jim, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just before we move up too far along, another question about the IDC. So when partners are established, is that not part of the agreement that I don't know how it works, but for instance, if the MBL is saying, yeah, I want to be a partner, are they acknowledging that this IDC cap exists and that they'll work with it?
I would assume so. I think it's the only tricky thing is if you apply for an award that could use the CSU, but it doesn't have to use the CSU, where at that point, it's kind of the institution would have to make that call. But we submitted a proposal recently that was open like that, and the award had a 25% match, and we presented to our OSP, and we said, this is allowed to be a CSU project. It doesn't have to be, but if you allow us to have it as a CSU project, then we can use the difference in the savings in IDC as matching this project. And in that case, our OSP said that was fine, so we were able to proceed. Eileen?
Thanks. I just wanted to make a little point about NRCS, and this might apply to some of the other USDA agencies. I'm not totally sure. But for NRCS, we're restricted beyond even the CESU indirect cost deviation. So we're restricted on our annual appropriations to 10% of total direct costs. It's a cap. So anything we have to do multiple calculations. So we have to figure out if the cap applies, and if it does, which it almost always does for CESU projects, we can't go beyond that based on statute. So like for NRCS, I just want, when in the context of this conversation, and I know NRCS is not the heaviest participant in NAU, but it's an important conversation. Totally agree that there's certainly more than enough, I think, justification to raise the indirect rate. I mean, especially when you look at the coming revisions to the CFR, the uniform guidance, this is all very well recognized that costs are increasing and the need is there. But, there are other factors that can limit what the agencies can do, even if they want to. So, for the example that we were just talking about, like whether the participant wants to participate in that project as a CESU or not, if maybe they don't want to because they need to charge a higher indirect rate, that might not get you a higher indirect rate if you're working with NRCS. There really isn't another option. It gets even more complicated with the type of funding, like with IRA, but I don't want to get into that here because that's a really deep rabbit hole. But the point was just, like I said, just keep in mind that there's other factors to keep in mind in that conversation about the indirect rates.
That's a great point. Thank you. Okay, so that was actually the end of my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing. And I think, Tom, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to weigh in briefly. So for all of the CSU, what we call multi-partner agreements that bring together the federal agencies and non-federal partners in each CSU region, there's language in the agreement that everyone is accepting as signatories that points to the CSU programmatic and direct cost rate. And then there are exceptions language in there, like Eileen just mentioned, related to USDA agencies. So that is typically, and for new partner applications, there's a requirement for a letter accepting the programmatic indirect cost rate. So that's everyone is basically agreeing to that in writing that they'll accept that. Now for RFPs and broad area announcements and other funding notifications like that, some of them, they really need to specify the eligibility requirements within each of those funding opportunity announcements. And so for some agencies, they will post on grants.gov or through the CESUs to post on the local websites or the national website, funding opportunity announcements. Sometimes they'll limit eligibility to CESU partners within a particular region. Sometimes I just posted a couple of these where it's open for all CESU partners across the whole network. And then for those that are broader, so Fish and Wildlife Service, I think Bureau of Land Management, maybe, I think, Eileen, you mentioned NOAA, and some others have funding opportunity announcements, but they do have language in there that speaks to the fact that if an award is funded and the recipient is a CSU partner institution, the expectation is that the project would be administered as a CSU award. Or similarly, if it's a USGS Fish and Wildlife Co-op unit institution, it would be administered as a Fish and Wildlife Co-op unit award. So there's some eligibility language that's required to be in those funding opportunity announcements. And then I think where it's not specified, there's the opportunity for the potential recipient and the awarding agency to have a conversation to mutually agree upon an indirect cost, whether it's their full indirect cost, it's an off-campus rate, or if it's the programmatic indirect cost rate. So again, yeah, another rabbit hole to go down, but I think it's important to have some additional clarification for that. It's probably an area to put on our ever-growing frequently asked questions list for how these questions should be treated to share information.
Thanks, Tom. I'm just going to skip ahead one thing in the agenda since I'm talking and mention that this year we have the 25th year anniversary of the whole national CESU network. And I've been working with the other CESU directors to do a little webinar series to celebrate that. So one of our projects is going to present. I think it's this week. I don't have it's this week or next week. I don't know if Jackie knows the details.
It's next week.
So
It's Wednesday, the 10th at 4 p.m. Eastern. And we can share a link to Elin if you want me to send it around.
So before I'm gonna hand it back to Brian and Jackie to talk about the expert database, but I see that Nick has his hand up. So before we move on.
Yeah, thanks, Elin. One of the things from the presentation that really struck me was the real discrepancy in the number of awards provided by federal agencies. And I think NPS was more than an order of magnitude more awards than other agencies. And I don't know if that's just Tom and Brian trying to keep the CESU all for themselves, or why is it that other agencies are not utilizing the CESU or making opportunities available through it?
Brian or Tom, would you like to provide any thoughts?
Yeah, there's actually a couple things going on. First, the numbers are not quite as different as they seem. We were tracking any agreement that actually was active at the beginning of 2019. So there are a number of agreements that were had actually been issued prior to 2019 that we counted from NPS, but that other agencies didn't do it that way. They only did awards since 2019. Nevertheless, there are still a lot more awards from Park Service. And I think part of it is just that it's just become part of Park Service culture that we use the CESU mechanism a lot. And we do a lot of small projects. There are definitely other agencies, Department of Defense and Army Corps in particular are ones that tend to do much larger projects. So they may have a lot lower number, but they and a number of CESUs actually have quite a bit more of the total funding that goes through the CESU system. Park Service is definitely not the highest funder, even though we are, I think, routinely the largest number of projects. Tom, did you have anything to add to that?
I think that covers it, and that carryover number that you mentioned makes a difference in the what's presented. I'd say too, we encourage the other agencies to make use of the program to connect with cooperators as much as they can, or however it makes sense to them. And this is just one of many avenues that the agencies fund projects with partners. But the other folks on the call today too can speak to this somewhat. Maybe Eileen or Todd, even for their agencies, or Sherry and others, because I've just been in the data recently looking at even National Park Service through another program area, and there are a lot of projects that are funded there too, which I of course had the question, well, why aren't those coming through the CSU program? And there are reasons why, because they're working with different types of organizations, or the outputs of the funded project are different than the aims of this program. Research, technical assistance, and education, that might be something more like facilities design or something like that. So there are a number of reasons why.
Eileen?
Yeah, I feel like I should answer since Tom called on me, but that's okay. So NRCS has gone through a lot of transitions, particularly staffing transitions in the last, I would say, 10 years. And in particular with CESU, so there was, for a while there was kind of no real programmatic engagement, and there was a fairly minimal administrative engagement. When I became involved, I did a lot of work to at least strengthen the administrative side, show up to the meetings, to engage, to try to really meaningfully track the projects. We don't have the best tracking mechanism in our grants management system. We're hoping that that's going to improve in the coming years. I've put a lot of attention on it to try to make sure that it does where there's opportunity to do so. So I think part of it is also just tracking what could be or is a CESU. There may be projects out there that could be that just weren't, or that were, and we just didn't track it. But again, you know, there's also the challenge when you have institutional change and you have personnel changes. We do have 2 designated programmatic contacts, and we have for the last few years after I kind of rattled some change to get people designated in that role who actually were allowance holders for those projects and involved and would have some meaningful involvement. Mark Shu is the primary and David Limbo. I don't think they made it today. I didn't see them on the participants list, but you know, they've been responding to things certainly better than in the past. And I've been trying to make sure that you all, as the regional unit coordinators, know them now. We had to make some updates, but I think at least for NRCS, that's those have been the main challenges. You know, there's also now like the challenge of on top of the organizational challenges, you know, new funding streams that have to be spent, and you know, the agencies have to work to figure out how they want to spend that and what the implications are for those new funding streams. But I don't think you know, from NRCS's perspective, it's not that there's not interest. There's definitely interest, certainly with the folks I work with, and I tend to work with the more scientifically focused staff and divisions and branches and things. But you know, it's also like Tom mentioned and Brian mentioned, it's building that culture. And I don't think NRCS at least has had the capacity to build that culture for CESU yet. I'm hopeful that they will. But once you build it, you know, then I think it bears fruit, which is what you see with the Park Service. So.
Thanks. Okay, so Jackie, I don't know who's going to talk about the experts database on.
I think I'm up, so let me see if I
Okay.
can share my
We can
screen.
tag team.
Yeah, and we can end with Bruce here too. If there are questions, we can have some discussion as well. So I've got something, let me just share my screen here. Let's see if I can get the right one. Are people seeing my slide? Hopefully, not a big mess of other things. Okay, great. So yeah, thanks, Elin. And following up on some of your updates and some of the discussion we've had about kind of just how funding is distributed, I wanted to talk just a little bit about that because I think it actually does have some bearing on kind of why people should be interested in using experts database. So just real briefly, you know, there has been some real growth in the number of projects and the total funding that we're seeing coming through the North Atlantic Coast CSU. So we went from 15.5 million to 27.9 million, which is nearly a double in funding. Again, with some caveat, I mentioned what how the NPS did their numbers. And also, I think that we did a better job actually identifying projects this round than the previous round, but there's still definitely growth in the amount of funding. But that said, there is some disproportionate ways that this funding is distributed. So in particular, the funding primarily went to established non-federal partners. That's partners that had joined the CSU before 2019. And it's not just the length, it's not just that the new partners didn't have the full 5-year time to participate and get projects. Many of the new partners actually joined in early 2019. But basically 64% of the established partners received projects, whereas only 38% of new partners received projects over the 5-year period. And it's even more of a disproportionality when you look at how much funding and the total number of projects, with the 16 established partners getting 95% of the projects and about 97% of the funding. And that basically means that there's 45% of our non-federal partners that are not getting that did not get projects over that 5-year period. So I think there are probably a variety of reasons for that. There are some of capacity, just whether or not a partner had time to actually respond to requests for projects or do proposals. Some of it is that they just may not have had the specific expertise that projects were calling for. But I think a big factor is that agencies are often not aware of the expertise that we have in some of our non-federal partners. And that's where I think that this experts database can be a big help. So our neighboring network, our neighboring CSU down in the Chesapeake watershed has had a experts database for 4 or 5 years now, and they've found that agencies definitely go to that database as a first place to start looking for expertise and start looking for potential partners. And the partners have found it to be extremely useful when they participated. It really only takes a couple of minutes to set up a profile in the database, and then that information is available whenever federal agencies and other funders are looking for specific expertise. So I'm gonna just try and see if I can share. Hopefully folks can see my web browser now. I just wanted to kind of walk through a little bit on some of the options here. So it's highly searchable. So basically when a person puts up a profile, they're including a CV, and the search will actually pull any terms that are in someone's CV or in or anywhere in their profile. So if, for example, I know I actually studied coyotes for a while, so let's see if it actually pulls me up because it's mentioned on my CV that I studied coyotes. So if you're actually looking for a project related to coyotes, you can go in, you can find the expert. You can look and see if you should be able to click on it and get into the profile. But I think here it is. So inside my profile, I've got basic information about myself as well as my research interests. You can click and open up my CV. I've got a biographical sketch. I've got education, and I've also got a link to a project that's in our projects database on our CSU website. And I mentioned that it's pretty quick to apply, and I just wanted to show you how that works. You just have to click on this apply button, and essentially you just have to acknowledge that it's going to be publicly available. You provide your name, title, select your CSU, and then your partner, the partner that you're a member of, upload your CV. And then a lot of the rest is optional. So your research website's optional. Your phone contact is required. Address is optional. It's going to ask you if you're interested in being part of an emergency response program. And in particular, we're using people to build out our roster of folks who can respond in Rhode Island for a program called Scientific Support for Environmental Emergency Response. So if you're interested in that, you will potentially get added to that roster of folks if there's an incident that happens in Rhode Island. Even if you're outside of the area, you could get contacted. And in addition, federal agencies may be interested if there's regional responses that need to happen, as well as the potential for expanding that SEER program elsewhere. But then again, you can provide information about your research disciplines and your research interests, a biographical sketch. Again, most of this is optional, so you don't even have to put it in. The things that you have to put in are things like, dropping in your CV and providing some basic information that can be provided in just a couple of minutes. And then when you have that information in, you can hit submit, and it'll go and be reviewed by an admin. And the admins, we're trying to set up admins at each of our partners so that they can review profiles that come through from their organization. But if you don't have a partner admin yet, it'll come up to Jackie or me, and we'll approve experts and process them. I know I talked pretty fast because I'm trying to keep us on schedule, but I did also want to mention our projects database as well. And this is something that in particular, our student assistant, Mallory Lentz, has been really helpful. And many of you have probably heard from her as she's been trying to get projects into this database. Again, this is a searchable database. You can go in and let me see if I can actually probably easier just to do this live. So that's the database is under projects. If you are an agency and you're interested in a particular partner, you can go in and you can actually look up and find out, I'm gonna use you, Nick, sorry, because I know you have a lot of projects in here. And you can basically say, okay, we're interested in working with Nick Fisicelli. What projects has he done? What products have been produced from those projects? And like, I know this particular project has a pretty good entry here with its information, as well as links to the different products that we've been able to obtain for this project. So again, this is a tool that if you as a partner organization are basically working to maintain your projects and help us maintain your projects in this database, then when agencies are looking for potential expertise, they can come look at this database and get a better idea of past success. I did want to mention for this that we're unfortunately going to be losing Mallory in a couple of months, but after she leaves, it's my intention to basically keep up with all the Park Service projects and get them entered. But we will need help from technical reps at our non-federal partners to basically get new projects entered and to work with your PIs to make sure that they're maintained through their life cycle. So we like to keep track of how much funding they get, as well as any products that are produced. And in particular, this is going to be a huge help if we can maintain this in our next 5-year renewal. Looking ahead, that will have that instead of having to scramble to get the information from everyone, we will actually have this data right away. And I should just one last thing I should mention is that the information in our CSU projects database will feed into a national database that we have for the CSU system as a whole. That's also being stood up. And I think that's all I wanted to present here. And I know I covered a lot, but if we have a couple of minutes and there are any questions, please let me know. Stunned silence, sorry. Nor, did you have your, I'm sorry.
Well, Brian, I might just quickly ask, because this is something at UMaine we've done sort of fits and starts a couple of times with expert databases and have not always found that the audience we'd been intending was using it the way we'd been intending it to. So do you have any metrics in place or in mind for evaluating how effective this is going to be? I mean, in part because, as technical representatives, we want to be encouraging people, but we want to encourage them to use their time wisely too. So the more we can say, hey, yes, the federal agencies are really actively searching and using this on a regular basis, you're going to get more opportunities if your name's in there, the better off we are. So anyway, I just didn't know if you might have any metrics.
I'm assuming that we can get some metrics from analytics as far as the searches and where those, how many searches are made. It's definitely a good question, and I know anecdotally that from our neighbors in the Chesapeake watershed that they've definitely seen an increase in projects that they think is related to having the experts database. We can probably start, within the agency. I can start trying to collect some information on just who's using it for sure. Right now, not many people are because we're still standing it up, with only 30 some odd profiles. It's not at the level of the number of participants that we're going to need to actually really attract, I think, the federal agencies as a first stop. I'm hoping we can get once we get above 100 to really roll it out as a really valuable tool.
Yep, thanks.
Raymond?
Yeah, I'll just say, have a comment here from Department of Defense perspective here, at least at the installation level. One of our greatest challenges is to move money, and the expert database I can see is an ideal way of not only reaching out to an expert, but reaching out to an expert that can actually receive funds. So this is going to be a really important tool, because there's been plenty of times where we know somebody, someone knows us, we talk, and then discover, oh, I can't send you money in any way, shape, or form unless you're part of the CESU network. And so if you're an entity already, great. But if you're not, sorry. And that kind of goes along with, you know, the time it takes to become a member. That's another challenge that we've had. So but yeah, I think that's I see it. I don't know if you'd ever be able to develop a metric that is meaningful, but from an anecdotal standpoint, I could see it being very valuable.
And I'll just, mention that, the funding opportunities and requests for letters of interest and those sorts of avenues are like within my agency, within the Park Service. That's probably the smallest percentage of use of the CSU. Primarily, people are going directly to experts that they've been able to locate, and they're just directly providing fund, working with them to set up a project. So by having an experts database, it gives them a place where they can, rather than having to work with their own personal network, they can actually get a larger pool of people who are potentially going to be interested in their projects. So it's a way to hopefully get us beyond just using the people we know, and I think it's going to be particularly beneficial for early career folks who are starting out and trying to set up relationships with an agency.
Thanks, Brian.
You're welcome.
I'm going to ask Tom Fish if he has any updates for us.
Sure. Don't see. Can you see me okay? I do have some slides to share. But before I start that, I'll just, before I lose the thought, on the experts database front, and Brian, you guys have maybe talked about this already, but it would be possible to query folks, how did you become connected with your PI, or ask the PI if they had someone reach out. Anyway, there are ways that we could think about in terms of getting some metrics regarding the effectiveness of having the experts database, in addition to some of the other ways that people get in touch. I won't mention yet the Paperwork Reduction Act OMB approval process that we'd have to go through to do that. But anyway, we can have a conversation about it. So yeah, let me bring up a couple slides here. Some of this is kind of review for folks, but it's it can be useful for newer partners as well. So let me share. So is the slide showing up yet?
Yes.
Okay, great. No, it's so I'm just going to have a few slides, and then we can open up to some questions if people have those. So again, thanks for the opportunity to participate today. Get my computer to cooperate here. For those who are new or maybe in review, so the CSU program was authorized in 1998 by Congress, was established up with the first 4 CSUs on the ground in 1999. And so this year is the 25th anniversary of the program. This map shows the 17 CSUs representing the biogeographic regions that they cover. The lines are there, but they're a bit arbitrary because we do have projects that extend beyond the boundaries and are transnational, working with partners in Canada and Mexico, et cetera. But each of the regions there is shown with its date of entry into the program. And then with the host institution that is in the coordinator role for each of the regions. So North Atlantic Coast up on the right, at University of Rhode Island. And then the symbols on the right, presenting basically the 3 primary focus areas of the program: research, technical assistance, and education and training. And then the figure before or below that is kind of the strategic aims of the program: collaboration, innovation in how we do partnering, generating new information, usable knowledge, applied science, and then evaluation. So we heard a bit more from Elin today about the renewal process, but that's a regular routine process within the CSUs. Every 5 years, each CSU undergoes that 5-year review and renewal process. And then we've done some activities to review and evaluate the entire program. Then across the bottom of this figure, or this image, is the 19 agencies that participate currently in the program. And then next slide is really a schematic of the program in terms of the Interagency Council. At the top of this figure, that's the governing body for the program. And then coming down to the regional representation from agencies. And then in the center, the CESU units themselves with a host university, director and staff, other duties stationed. Federal scientists like Brian, for example, from National Park Service at the North Atlantic coast. And then a mix of federal agencies, state and local agencies, nonprofits and non-governmental organizations, tribes, tribal agencies, and academic institutions of all different types within each of the CESUs. And then they're bound together under these 5-year multi-partner agreements that provide terms and conditions, basically, and then for each funded action that adheres to each of those agencies' financial assistance requirements. And then the bottom is the kind of focus of the work, the focus of the collaborative activities within different jurisdictions by agency management units like parks and forests and refuges, public trust resources, threatened and endangered species, et cetera, or particular study areas and regions. So that's meant to be just kind of a figure that shows how, not how it works, but who's involved in the kind of scope of it. I have a couple slides that just show kind of current numbers. The one on the left is just showing from the beginning of the program to current. We now have 526 partners in the program. We started with 36. And the enrollments number is larger. That's because a number of our partners are enrolled in more than one CESU, so they're counted twice. And then on the right is the different types of organizations and the trends in enrollment and withdrawal over the last 24 years. This only goes through 2023. I haven't updated this figure yet, but federal agencies, institutions of higher education, non-governmental organizations, tribal government, state government, local government, and then the withdrawals of the partners that have left the program, which is far fewer than those that have remained. And then I have similar representation for the North Atlantic coast. This I just updated after your most recent new partners were added. But basically same breakdown of different types of organizations and when those numbers changed over the last 25 years. Here's the representation of the agencies again on our council and the individuals. Some of those may be on the phone with us today. And then at the bottom of the screen are the representatives for the CSU Host University Directors Group. We have representation from that group to sit in on the council meetings. The council meets quarterly. And right now we have the director from the Piedmont South Atlantic Coast CSU at the University of Georgia, and the Desert Southwest CSU at University of Arizona from the sponsored program side. And then just a small figure on the right is the memorandum of understanding. And I'll mention that again in a minute, but that's what binds the agencies together and keeps that program or keeps that group together to facilitate the program over time. I've put in these graphics. I don't believe I've shared these before. This is from our national meeting last year. This is just some examples of well, the agenda that's too small to read, honestly, but the some of the work that was discussed. We had a graphic facilitation facilitator working with us, and we covered a lot of different topics. One of which I'll mention is the connection between people and nature, and that's a kind of growth area for this program, looking at public health, looking at the impacts of people on nature and the environment, and the impacts of nature and the environment on people and society. Talking about leveraging the CSUs, working cross regions, so across CSUs on different topics, connecting with other networks like the Long-Term Ecological Research Program, and others. So there was a lively discussion that was last July. We'll have another meeting this coming July as well. This is a snapshot of the topics that the CSU Council is engaged in. This is largely from our most recent meeting, but at the top you see the CSUs, and North Atlantic Coast is one of 5 renewing this year. 4 of those are the first 4. One is Hawaii Pacific Islands was the last CSU to be stood up, and they're kind of on a tail end of the rotation. The MOU just received last week. The Department of the Interior's signed pages. It only took 11 months to get the signatures. We had some of them within days. We had a large delay because the day before the signatures were due for the department agencies, the department changed their policy on how MOU signatures were implemented. And so it launched us into a whole long process. But anyway, that's encouraging that we've got those now. That continues to 2029. So we're in good shape for a number of years going forward. The National Program Office, the NPO, and the Host University Support, HUS for short, funding. That is the funding that supports the whole program and the funding that is distributed out to each of the regional CESUs. This is something we could carve in stone on the agenda because it's on the agenda every time. But we have a number of different actions underway right now, both looking at providing additional funding to the national program, providing an increase in funding to each of the host institutions. Down the list here, there's a bullet for working groups. There's a host university support working group that has put together a pretty robust proposal to the council that's going to be discussed later this month to try to get some of the additional funds that could support the additional activities that Elin mentioned earlier in the meeting. And the same would follow suit for the other CSU regions around the country. Those funds come from those council agencies. So the way that it works now is it's kind of a even distribution of funding based on the enrollments of the agencies in each of the CSUs. We're looking at
sorry to interrupt for a second. Is it what slide is everyone seeing? I don't know if I'm having a lag or what. I seem to be looking at something that is not what. Now I'm looking at what you're talking about.
Should be just kind of a list, lots of text.
Yeah, that just came up just now.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, thanks.
Anyhow, trying to undertake a kind of a well-informed conversation with proposals to increase the level of support across the program. We also have within our National Park Service, so the host university, the National Program Office is hosted by the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the rest of the agencies. So within the National Park Service, I'm working with our budget and finance staff to crosswalk the different proposals and also look at current and optimal resource levels, both financial and human resources, to support this program sustainably into the future. And we're using the 25th anniversary as at least one point to mention that it's important for us to take a deep look at this going forward. So I'll move beyond to this to talk a little bit about some new, we also talk about the different policies, the new partner memo, the project reporting memo. We're developing a memo to address partners that have been in the program but that have been inactive for a long period of time or maybe are non-responsive to different administrative actions and how best to address those things. We've been asked by our non-federal partners, the directors group, the agencies have been asked if they could develop brief kind of how-to documents, agency CSU award guidance, and that would serve both the agencies themselves for the staff in the field, but also for those recipients that might be wanting to work with one or more of the agencies. If there was a 2-pager, 4-pager that basically spells out how this works, because different agencies have different requirements and mechanisms and approaches for announcing funding opportunities and for selecting partner and cooperator and recipients and PIs, and for administering the projects. There's a lot of overlap across the agencies, but there are nuanced differences that I think are important. And we've had a request from our federal, for the federal agencies to provide some of this guidance. It's been provided in small cases or in cases, case by case basis in different regions, but it'd be nice to have that kind of universally for everybody. New federal partners. So just wanted to mention that we've been having some additional conversations. I think I say this almost every time with the Environmental Protection Agency. There's some new interest from new parts of the EPA about re-enrolling in the program. And most recently, I've also talked with Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement. I think one of the reasons why they've been taking a while to process the enrollment application is that they've had some new authorities assigned to them that expands their jurisdictional footprint to the insular areas and territories and other areas, and that's entered into the conversation with regard to the block of authorities language that they need to include in their new enrollment agreement language. So I think, and Brian mentioned that he's, I think, talked with them too. I believe that they're going to be coming back around here shortly to enroll here in the North Atlantic coast. And then the last agency I just spoke with last week was the USAID under the State Department. It's interested in perhaps enrolling in the program as well. So can keep everyone informed as those things move forward. One more mention of a working group. We have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility working group, and we've just posted a new DEIA statement and principles on the national website just last month. And then I did mention that we have a national network meeting coming up this July, and because of the 25th anniversary, there are some different activities happening. Elin mentioned this seminar series that's happening jointly with the Rocky Mountain CSU. And then there are some other articles in the works for highlighting 25 years of collaboration between the partners in the CESUs. I think that's all. I just probably have covered some of this, but some emerging topics that have come out of that national meeting and since, but integrating Indigenous knowledge and Western science is one. Nature-based solutions. So there's some additional interest and activity happening there, especially under the funding that has come out of this administration. And then continue, and this is a screenshot of the DEIA statement. And I think that is it. So yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I know we're pretty close to time, but thanks again for the opportunity to present. It's kind of a lot, but if you have questions later, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I know we're at 11:32, but I just wanted to invite Mallory to give a little update on the social media before we wrap up.
Hi, yeah, I can do that really quickly. I'll just share my screen really fast. Oh, here we go. By the way, I'm Mallory. I am the graduate student assistant at the NAC CESU, and hopefully this loads quick enough. Okay, hopefully that works. Okay, so so far, all I've done is create a Instagram page for us, which is like the first Instagram page for any of the CESUs, surprisingly. And just a couple posts about the experts database, welcoming new partners, the 25th anniversary seminar we have next week, and just, you know, stuff about us as a team. And then we also have a link tree as well with all the different links to the websites, the CSU National Network, experts database, and funding and opportunities. As well as a LinkedIn. And this is what you would see if you were logged on to the LinkedIn and visiting the page. Sorry. And in addition to all of that, we're working on creating more web briefs about different projects that we want to highlight. This is one of them that was conducted in 2023 with the Center for Coastal Studies, and NPS. And so we just kind of like, I think for future projects, we're looking for more web briefs, more particular projects that we want to highlight. So if any of you have particular projects that you guys have worked on that you would like to highlight, please send them my way to the NAC CSU email. I'm sure you've been getting my emails for the past couple months, so you know where to reach me. And yeah, I think we also want to establish some more networking and more connections with partners through social media. So if you would like to connect with us through social media and learn about more funding opportunities, this is the space. So there you go.
Thank you so much, Mallory. So I know we're at 11:34 and I want to respect everyone's time. So I know a few people have already jumped off, but we'll stay on if anyone has any questions or comments or anything. You know, we're here, but you know, if I understand if anyone, you know, if you need to hop off too. So I guess I just want to thank you for joining today, and I hope you all got something out of this meeting. Brian, you want to say anything before we?
No, just thank you all for participating. This was great to see so many folks join us today.
Okay. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.